What's up everybody? Hope all is well. Alright, Deadlink, this is a good one, launched a few weeks ago to early access and thus is technically an incomplete game, but hear me clearly, the combat is so good and what is present functions so well, it almost doesn't matter. I've been playing a ton and loving it, but I'm torn. It's incredibly fun, the strategy, the pace, the brutality, all top-notch stuff. However, after just a few hours of play, the lack of depth and dearth of items from being early access does become obvious and adds a small blemish to what's an otherwise pristine experience. Deadlink was developed by Groovy Entertainment, and as far as I can tell, it's their first game. It's advertised as a cyberpunk FPS with roguelite elements, which to me sounds like the perfect recipe, and it pretty much is. The futuristic theme allows for all kinds of wild high-tech weaponry, gunplay is Doom Eternal inspired with a fast-paced combat chess emphasis, and the structure of the game is like Hades or Gunfire Reborn, where you run dungeons and obtain various items and currency to level up your player power. We'll get into all that, but yeah, it is early access, and I understand that puts some off. Will the rest of the content ever get added? Will it ever make it out of early access? I get it. Personally, I'm confident it will, and for 15 bucks, I feel comfortable with the purchase. I spent more on that on a few slices of pizza yesterday, crushed those in like 10 minutes, but been playing Deadlink for like 20 hours. In addition, there's essentially zero story. There is a plot, but this is a game that puts all its money where its mouth is, purely in the gameplay. And that gameplay is relentlessly violent. By the end of this video, I aim to answer these 5 questions. How's the roguelite aspect? How's the FPS aspect? Is it fun to play? It's early access, so what's missing? And finally, is it worth 15 bucks? Let's do it. Now, I know gunplay only goes so far. You want to build player power and progress your character towards a playstyle you enjoy, and that's exactly what roguelites do in their own unique and brilliant way. As good as Deadlink's combat is, it's the overarching roguelite gameplay loop that makes it work and be so replayable. So what we're going to do here is simply walk through a gameplay session so you can see how this aspect of the game works. Before we start though, we need to talk player power. This is key. It comes from 2 sources in Deadlink. First is via Deadlink upgrades in the hub. These are high value, permanent buffs, and the currency needed to buy them is all obtained by simply playing. There's no in-game pay-to-win cash shop here. So that's number 1, permanent Deadlink upgrades. The second place you get player power from is via implants, weapon mods, and neural boosts that are obtained in and exist for just that combat run. But these 2 contrasting methods to obtaining player power create this enjoyable and creative progression system where you have both immediate and long-term needs in mind. It's cool because you do obtain permanent power, but it's enhanced via temporary upgrades made available to you that change with each run. So it's always fresh and exciting in that you're constantly trying to figure out how to make the most of what's been given. Okay, so at the start of each combat run, you select a combat shell to pilot. There's currently just 2, a soldier and a hunter, with 2 more coming soon. Each combat shell has its own distinct playstyle, abilities, and permanent upgrades. I'm partial to the hunter, which plays a lot faster and more assassin-like with high burst damage. Hit start mission and we're off. You enter a combat arena and the doors close. Enemies of various difficulties spawn over the course of a few minutes and you just need to kill them all. There's a lot of strategy in combat we'll discuss in the next section, but it's highly variable and challenging and grows in difficulty as you progress through each arena and level. Upon completion, you're presented with a few doors that are randomly determined. Behind each is a reward for clearing the room. Now remember how I said some of your player power is temporary? This is what I was talking about. In this case, I got 3 doors to choose from, though there are many others. In this case, I got a shop where I can purchase pretty much anything, tokens which are used to purchase permanent upgrades back at the hub, and by the way, this is the only place you can get them, and also shell upgrades which let me temporarily upgrade my combat shell. Which you choose is up to you, but some thought is required. For example, in this case, I chose the token because I'm still working to obtain all permanent upgrades, but I could have chosen the shop. Though here, in this case, I have max health, max armor, and it's early in the combat run, so I don't really have a lot of money to spend in the shop, or I could have just taken the shell upgrade. The best door not present here is one called Neural Boost that lets you choose from a few powerful buffs and implants. More on these soon. So select your door, obtain the reward, and move on to the next combat arena where the things get progressively harder. Rinse and repeat this process until you die, or, and I'm not even sure this is possible, clear every arena of every level. I say I don't know if that's possible because I haven't done it. This game is legit wicked hard. Assuming you die, you're sent back to the hub where you can purchase permanent upgrades and jump back in for another combat run, slightly upgraded, more deadly, more survivable, more likely to make it further. That's the roguelite gameplay loop in a nutshell. Make sense? Before we get out of this section though, I want to quickly show you the permanent upgrades and talk more about Neuro Boost I mentioned earlier. So permanent combat shell upgrades work like this. Back at the hub, you can spend experience points and tokens to gear up your combat shell. Some buffs affect all shells, others are shell specific. Early on they're cheap, but as they grow in power, so does their cost. But what's important to point out here is this. You see how it says Matrix Upgrade 4 gain an additional activator slot? This is critical and related to the coolest roguelite aspect of the game, what I'm about to show you, Neuro Boosts. So at the end of almost every room, you will get a Neuro Boost and implant door, and this is really the focal point of player power. These are temporary upgrades that exist for this run and are linked to something called the implant matrix. But notice the variety, the different damage types, different affixes, different perks. Notice how the implants have a battery indicator. I'll explain that. But make your selection and it brings you to the implant matrix screen to fit your newly acquired gear, and this is where it all comes together. Let's start from the top. You have 4 implant rows, each with different power output. How this works is, for example, in the first row, each time I swap weapons, any active buff an implant provides will be activated, and the only implants I can put in this row are ones that require 1 bar of power. Here, for example, when I swap weapons, my next shot is corrosive damage, and any electric damage is increased by 30% for 3 seconds. The second row provides more power and thus lets me plug in slightly stronger implants with even more powerful active and passive buffs, and so on. Now, you'll notice some rows have 2 implant slots while there's 1. When you're new, you'll have just 1 in each row, but as you play and unlock the permanent combat shell upgrades like I showed above, additional implant slots here are unlocked, meaning you can slot in more implants during a run and get more buffs. The beauty of the system is in its flexibility because you can carry unused implants and have multiple slots at the end of each arena. Before entering the next, you'll have a chance to swap them around as you see fit for the conditions you're meeting. So cool system, isn't it? I love roguelites. They're constantly feeding the power trip. Every 5-ish minutes, you have to decide, how do I want to get more powerful? Now, while the system design itself is fantastic, there is a downside here. Like I mentioned, I feel the roguelite aspect of the game is the one that's still early access and only half-baked. There's only 2 characters to choose from, only a handful of permanent upgrades. I saw maybe 20 different implants tops, and even the weapon mods are the basic, add corrosive damage or whatever. It's lacking when compared to others I've played, like the award-winning Hades, and even the underappreciated Gunfire Reborn has literally hundreds of items and skills and weapons to choose from. I think Deadlink can get there, but right now, if you're considering it strictly for its roguelite aspect, you'll find it light. Deadlink is a roguelite, but I think it's an FPS first and foremost. Combat is incredible. I played a lot of shooters and say with confidence that this is near AAA level stuff. You see the obvious, the pacing, the variability, the intensity, but what makes it AAA quality combat can only be felt, not seen. It's fluid, it's empowering, it's strategic. Opportunities pop in and out of existence with each passing second, and the focus needed to take advantage of them in that short window is considerable. Feedback is immediate and obvious. The guns carry a certain weight and the punch of each shot is felt. You don't ever feel backed into a corner, but you do, you know what I mean? It all synergizes into a really exceptional combat experience. Doom Eternal is the most obvious reference here, hands down my favorite shooter ever, and while Deadlink is no Doom Eternal on a fundamental level, the core gameplay itself is nearly identical. I mentioned the combat chess theme, and by that I mean you can't just attack enemies, guns blazing. You need to think a few moves ahead and set up plays. Certain enemies require certain damage types at certain points in their health pool, and to optimize damage, you need to utilize combos or chain together strings of events to activate various perks and buffs, and the arenas get overrun with various enemies who behave in different ways, so there's a healthy balance of thinking ahead, but also, running for your life. Unfortunately, these similarities don't end there. Mobility is pretty much identical. You get a dash and a climb ability to add verticality, as well as various jump jets placed around the room. They all help you stay ahead of the pack and offer up some nice ad hoc maneuvers. In terms of guns, you get just 2 weapons. I know, not much, but hear me out. Those weapons get changed so much from run to run that it's not as bad as it sounds. It'll be a revolver in the first arena, but by the end it's shooting exploding corrosive shells, and your grenades are setting people on fire who then explode and set their buddies on fire. It's great. So, yeah, in a sense, compared to other games with more guns, having just 2 options, even with all the mods, does limit the depth of strategy some, but it's serviceable as is and will only get better as they add more onto the game. A key aspect of combat in roguelites is that health and shields don't always regen automatically. The only way to get health in Deadlink is to buy it, which maybe you can't afford even if you can find a shop in time. But shields can be regen during combat by comboing enemies. This is actually pretty cool. So remember how earlier we talked about implants having active and passive effects? Well, anytime you use one of the active effects on an enemy, they're marked. You can see how this guy here is flashing red sorta, and if you kill them when marked, they'll drop shields. It's a cool little mechanic that really encourages that press W to heal mentality. So I could go on, there's a ton to the combat, but you probably got the gist of it just from watching. It's great though, really fast paced, unforgiving, strategic in terms of pure combat. Deadlink has the fundamentals on lockdown. So final thoughts, I think whether or not it's worth it to you depends on what you're looking for. If combat is your jam, then you'll love it. That aspect is fully fleshed out and freaking fantastic. If, however, you're looking for a serious roguelite, I think you'll be left wanting. While it is structured as a roguelite, the early access status and lack of content in that area thus far falls short of what we've come to expect from the genre. However, I mean, we're talking, 15 to 20 bucks here. You really can't go wrong, and personally, I'm fine supporting small developers like this while the AAA industry is nothing but a struggle bus lately. There's no pay to win here, no live service, no battle pass, and no PvP to hinder your power trip. Siloed experiences like this take me back, and I find myself enjoying them in a, unique way. Feelings I'd almost forgotten. It's just me against the game, me against a system. It's the type of game where, you've got no distractions. You just put your head down and the hours fly by. It struck that magical chord, and for that, I appreciate it. And with that, I'm done. Appreciate taking the time. Take care of one another, and I will see you soon.